This is my homemade 9-inch disc sander. Back in about 1970 or so, I needed a disc sander but didn't want to buy one, so I made my own from an old washing machine motor, some scrap steel, and some 3/4 inch plywood. I made my disc 9 inches in diameter. But I'd suggest to anyone making one of their own to make it 8 inches in diameter instead, simply because 9-inch discs are harder to find. What I usually use these days is this sticky back sandpaper, and a lot of sandpaper comes in 9-inch wide, by the way, but anyway, it's sticky back stuff. When I first made this disc sander, I bought discs without the self-stick feature and some special glue, which was a lot like contact cement. When changing discs, it took a while to get all the old adhesive off, so I switched to self-adhesive discs later on, and I'm glad that I did. However, if you do go the way of the adhesive for sanding discs, you can simply cut your discs from full sheets of sandpaper as needed, rather than having to have discs on hand. I'm kind of sorry about this lousy drawing, but that's kind of top and side view of the thing. I don't know if you'll be able to see all the dimensions well, but that is what it is. The stand is made mostly from 3/4 inch plywood. The overall dimensions are 11.5 wide by 15 inch long overall. The size of the base is 10 by 13 inches. I made my base about 1 inch wider than the diameter of the disc and attached the table supports to the sides. The base plate itself is 10 by 13 inches. The table supports are 5.5 inches tall, 9 inches long overall at the base, and this is a 53-degree angle, which leaves me about 1 inch right there where I used to fasten the shroud. I made my base about 1 inch wider than the diameter of the disc and attached the table supports to the side of the base plate, just with a couple of, I don't know, nails or screws or something that I had handy. The table itself is 4 1/4 by 11.5 inches in my case, okay? And it's just held in place with 2 slotted wood screws, and if I need to swivel it out to get at the hole, you know, to change discs or because of what I'm doing or something, I just take one out and pivot the thing out of the way. And maybe every 10 years or so I'd have to put a little longer screw in there if I wear out the threads. But it hasn't been much of an issue. The motor is, I think it's a 1/2 horse motor. It's just an old-fashioned washing machine motor, simple, no fancy electronics or anything. It is 120 volts, and I think it runs at 1750 RPMs. It's not variable speed or anything. It just has a simple single pole, single throw on-off switch like you'd get for a light switch into a that's screwed into a single gang, what they call a handy box. And then of course, just this is the power is just this appliance cord that I had left over from something. I don't know if you can see it well or not, but this particular motor has a kind of a U-shaped flat base plate on it, okay? And so I was able to screw that baby down here, all right? And because of the diameter of the blade, I had to raise the motor up and a piece of 2x4 or 2x6 or whatever was enough to get it raised up enough so that the disc wouldn't quite hit the base plate. As an afterthought, I bent up a piece of 26 gauge aluminum sheet, which is right there, to fit underneath to fit under the disc and below the table to catch any dust that goes downward. And as you see, it just was just something I bent up and cut out just so as it would fit. Okay. I made a simple shroud to cover the periphery of the top half of the disc. It kept some of the dust from being slung around the shop. It is made from 26 gauge aluminum sheet. It almost totally encloses the back side of the disc and has a 1-inch wide rim that is pop riveted to a couple of tabs that are on the inside. It worked okay, but since it stood out over the sanding surface, it got in the way of the work, so I later on removed it. It just kind of bolted down or screwed down with a couple of tabs that were right here. The disc assembly itself. Adapting the disc to the motor shaft. First, I measured the shaft diameter of the washing machine motor. It was a 1/2 inch. I then chucked up a 2.5 inch diameter chunk of round bar in the lathe, faced it, and drilled a 1/2 inch hole about 2 inches deep. I suppose you could drill that hole a 64th under a 1/2 inch and then ream it exactly to a 1/2 inch, but I got away with just drilling it. I parted the adapter to be about 1.25 inches thick. I then drilled a 13/64 cross hole halfway through, right there. Then I drilled a 13/64 cross hole halfway through and tapped it 1/4 for an Allen head set screw. After locating the center of the disc to be on a piece of 1/4 inch mild steel plate, I marked it out a bit over 9 inches in diameter and flame cut it to rough shape. You could do the same thing with an angle grinder these days, I suppose, or a bandsaw. Once the piece was cut out, I marked a 1.5 inch diameter circle on the plate and then marked points on it at 90 degrees apart for the mounting holes. Next, I drilled the 4 holes on this side of the plate to 1/4 inch diameter and countersunk them deeply enough for flathead or countersunk screws. I centered the disc carefully over the adapter and marked the disc's hole positions onto the adapter with a transfer punch. And then drilled and tapped those holes in the adapter 1/4. After bolting the disc to the adapter, I mounted the assembly into the lathe and turned the OD of the disc to 9 inches. And that completes the sanding disc. So obviously I just screwed and bolted the whole thing together, and there's my homemade disc sander. That's what it does. So that's what my homemade disc sander does. Thank you for watching.